I've been going through Reddit, the comic book collecting subreddit, and there were a few different stories that I've come across that I thought would just be interesting to talk about. And this one, there's a few reasons for this one here. So this is dilemma over a late friend's copy of Ultimate Fallout 4. So the story here is, unfortunately, this person's friend passed away during the pandemic, and there had some kind of like agreement, or his wife had said that if that had ever happened, if he had passed away, something happened to him, that his friend here should come over and go through his collection and help sell it, and that kind of stuff. And so the first question that came in here is, one of the books that he had found was this Ultimate Fallout 4, and I get the impression from what he's talking about here that this is probably one of the most expensive books in this group, if not the most expensive book. And so he had a question on, should he sell the book, or whether that's getting it graded and then sell it, or should he have it set aside, so that the wife that's still there taking care of their kids can keep it, and whether it's pass it down to the kids or use it later, sell it later, that kind of thing. So my immediate reaction, and I'd be interested to hear in the chat what other people's thoughts are on this, but my immediate thought was that they should sell it. And so part of the reason being that when I think about someone who is not a collector, because if they're having someone else come in and do this for them, that means that their spouse is not a collector. The likelihood of this book not getting put aside or lost or damaged or something like that ends up taking the value away from it anyway is probably pretty high. Even if it's graded, something can still happen. Slabs do not help the book keep its value for like in its condition forever if you still are tossing them around or not handling them well. And so my thought was that in this case, like if this is especially a situation where they need money because of the spouse passing away, my initial thought was just sell the book. I would not have somebody keep it, whether it's for their kids or anything. If they want to buy something again later to remind them of their father, I would do that, or have some other item to remind them of their father. But yeah, I think in this situation, I would just sell. That's my take on it. But the other thing that I thought was important to point out with this was, I think that the way they handled this was really something impressive, because you don't see this very often. And so what you often will find is that something happens where someone passes away, and you have the spouse or the kids or whatever that aren't familiar with comics, and someone comes in and takes advantage of them. And so this, whether, whoever that is, like whether that's a dealer, or they do like they're like, oh, we'll just sell it in a garage sale. And like they're selling books that are worth $100 for $1 or a quarter and that kind of stuff. But this, they had a friend that they knew that could take care of this. And so if I talk about this with people like selling collections and all this talk, kind of right now where there are a lot of collections popping up and that kind of thing, it is worthwhile. This is one of those situations where I think it is worthwhile to pay someone to come in and have them evaluate what you have. Now, I think probably the most fair, something I've been thinking about, is probably the most fair way to do it is you have them come in and you have some type of contract agreement. And it's like, when you sell the books, they get 10% of it or something. And, because then that person that's coming in they will benefit as well when you sell these books. That is going to help gain their honesty. And because if you don't know them, now, if you know the person, that's another thing. But if you don't know them, like, you see like some of these like big collections that come in that are worth just huge sums of money. And you wonder, like, is the person not bringing someone in to evaluate it because they don't trust them, or they don't know? And I feel like this situation was handled very well to have somebody that So just something that if you have a big collection, if that's something like, because you never know what's going to happen in your future. If you have a big collection, like, make some type of agreement with someone that Whether that's, I mean, whether that could even be a dealer that you trust, or, something like that, whether that's a friend or whoever it is, make some type of deal with someone that to help handle this situation, because it could be, maybe it's just hundreds of dollars, but it could be thousands of dollars, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands. You never know. And if you don't have the knowledge, there's no way you're going to know what you have. And even if you can recognize something is an expensive book, if you don't know how to grade, you don't really know what those books are worth. And so, one example that I always like to point out was one that Alex the Comic Hoarder uses, and that's with he uses salt shakers, like as the example. And it's like, if you have 100 salt shakers on the table and one of those salt shakers is worth $1,000, the only person that knows that is a salt shaker expert, and so they're going to come in and they're going to pick that $1,000 salt shaker out of there. So you want to have your own salt shaker expert that can handle these types of situations for you, in this type of situation. And I think this was handled very well. Like, I think that comic should be sold personally, but regardless what decision he makes or this person makes, I think that was a great way to handle that. Now let's see. One of the other topics I'd wanted to touch on a little bit was this. I saw this post, and it was just about kind of like manufacturer type defects. This is does this hurt the value of an otherwise near mint comic? And so this person said, I'm fairly new to collecting, definitely a novice. So I've not seen this before, and the comic otherwise is definitely a nice copy. Any advice is welcomed. And so what they're showing is a comic with the staple on the back cover. And and then they're showing that it's offset in the centerfold and the staple on the back cover here as well, and offset on the centerfold. And so the answer to that is no. It does not have an impact on the grade within reason. Now, there are some where I think it might start to, and that's where I've seen some books where they've had the staple offset like 2 inches into the book on the front cover. And so you can't actually even read the interior completely, because the staple is going through the actual like interior art of the book. So if you have an extreme example like that, I don't know if how they would grade it. They might hit you with something for that. But with something like this, where you just have it a little offset, or even over here, like a half inch in or so, which is pretty normal, it will not impact your grade. And in fact, you will often see that the really high grade copies of these books, that's what they have. They often do have that staple offset into the back cover. And the reason that they end up getting these really high grades is because when the person is flipping through the book, at least the first like half of the book, they're putting zero pressure on the spine at the staple. And so you don't get staple tears. You don't get ticks at the staple. And so that's where you often do end up getting very high grade copies, is when it has an offset staple on the back. So just something that I've generally noticed is that, like, a lot of times when you see really high grade copies, whether it's gold or silver or whatever, that staple is often offset there. But this isn't the only type of manufacturing defect that doesn't hurt the grade. There are others as well. Like, for example, you've got you've got printer creases. And so if you're not familiar with printer creases, basically it's almost like the paper has folded over on itself and then gone through the rollers. And it's almost like you get this crease along the cover. And those, I've seen 9/8 with big printer creases on them. So you can definitely get some very high grades, 9/8 with printer creases. So you don't want to try to like pull them out or flatten those out or anything. You want to leave them as is. You can still get high grades. Now, some other, like another one that you would call a manufacturer defect, I guess, is like multiple covers. And multiple covers definitely do not impact your grade. In fact, they are actually a benefit to the book. You usually get a premium for a multiple cover, and often, not always, but often the interior cover is a higher grade. And the way CGC grades those is that they take the grade of the highest graded cover. So if you have 2 covers, the outside cover is a 2.0 and the inside cover is a 9.8, you get a 9.8 on that book. Now, the negative there is that book, it will get hurt a little bit on the sales numbers, because the thing that's actually being seen is a lower grade cover. So that can hurt it, even though you've got a 9.8. So that's a case where it might actually sell for less than an actual 9.8. But if you had like a 9.6 and a 9.8 or a 9.4 and a 9.8, you're going to get some very high numbers for those books. Like, for example, I'm not going to remember the issue number. Let's see. I think it's like Detective 118 or 114. Maybe it's 114. Yeah, Detective Comics 114. There is a Promise Collection copy, 9.8 double cover, where I think the outside cover is a 9.6 or a 9.4. Let's see here. So yeah, it's a 9.8 outside cover. First cover here is a 9.4. Interior cover is a 9.8. So the book gets a 9.8. This is a type of book that, even though the outside cover is, a lower grade, it's still a 9.4. And so you're going to get a huge premium in this book. I mean, I think it's the only 9.8 anyways, so it doesn't really matter. Yeah. Oh, there's two in a 9.8. But I would bet this one sells for more than the single 9.8 cover. But yeah. Now, one thing that you almost would call the manufacturer defect that does negatively impact the grade is Marvel chipping. And so for a long time, Marvel chipping didn't hit the grade too much. It was like they said, because it was caused by the manufacturer using these dull blades that then damaged the edge of the book, and you got these chips coming out of the cover, they wouldn't hit it as bad. But there was a recent, I don't know if it was an announcement or whatever, but I had heard that CGC was saying that they were actually going to start grading that a little bit harder, more like any other normal missing piece, because it, I don't know. I don't know why the change, maybe just because it does impact the visual appeal of the book so much. But that's something where it didn't used to hurt the grade quite as bad. It still did, but not quite as bad. And now I think it's hurting the grade a little bit more than it used to. ASM 361s you're talking about, lots of them have those manufacturer tears at the bottom. Yeah, there's another book that, there's the X-Men First Starjammers that has a defect, a manufacturer defect, but that one actually prevents it from that's why that book is so valuable in a 9.8, because you can't get it outside. Like, it's almost impossible to get the 9.8 on the book. And I know, I think Amazing Spider-Man 300 has a really weird right edge a lot of the time, where it's like a really rough right edge, and you can get some very high grades with that one as well, because it's just like how that one was cut. So yeah, it's interesting. There are a lot of these books that, unless you know that thing was a manufacturing issue on that book, you might not be aware that isn't really going to hurt the grade very much. The last Reddit one that I was talking about was this. I just thought I'd touch on was this one. This was never send a comic to CGC, but need to send a high value book. And so it says, "Good evening. It's been a long time since I got back into collecting. I have made many Silver Age raw purchases over the last year. I'm wanting to send a very high grade Fantastic Four book to CGC, but I have a few questions if any collectors mind assisting. The book is high grade, as mentioned. I believe it's worth $5,000 to $6,000. Based on reading through the site, it looks like I have to go with the unlimited value grading, but curious how I end up paying if it's based off of percentage of market value. I'm also really nervous about mailing it. Are there any pointers in terms of what carrier? I wish CGC was at shows other than the upcoming New York City Comic-Con, as it would be the easiest." So I thought I would comment on this one a little bit. So when CGC removed the Express tier, that definitely made things a little more tricky on these submissions, because you had the what is now the Vintage tier, which is up to like $400 in value. Then you had the what's now called the high value tier, which is up to $1,000. Then you had something called the Express tier, which is up to $3,000, and then you had the unlimited value, which was I believe 5,000 or like above the 3,000, but it was 3% of value of the book is what you paid. It was like a minimum of $150 for grading. But then it was after that, once you exceeded 3% of value, like a $5,000 book would be $150, but a $10,000 book would be $300. Then they changed that recently to eliminate the Express tier, and then they increased the unlimited value to 4%. So books like this are kind of in that middle ground that are almost kind of tough because, this person is saying that they believe it's worth 5 to 6 thousand, but what if there's color touch? What if there's trimming? What if there's something that immediately cuts the value of that book down to like $2,000 and they don't realize it? But they put the book into the system with CGC at 5,000. They now paid $200 to get it graded instead of, putting it into maybe the high value tier and paying like whatever it is, $80 or $85 or something like that. So where normally what I would have done is I would have put this book into the express tier because it feels pretty reasonable. Like at a $5,000, like what you think it is, put it in the express tier, valuing it at 3,000. If CGC grades it and they then think it's worth a lot more, they can send you the bill and charge you more. So I had that happen recently with that Crime Suspense Story 17 that I sent in. It ended up coming back in 8.0. I had gotten an email from CGC that said, we don't, this book that you sent in isn't in the tier you sent it in. I had sent it in the high value tier, and they're like, so we're charging you more. And so they charged me an extra amount, and that's fine. That's fine. And so what I would generally do is I would lean towards the lower end just because you don't know if you miss something. Like in that last submission I had that Adventures into Terror 43. And it came back as cover cleaned, and so I got a B1 restoration on it, and I didn't notice it. I don't even know how to catch cover cleaning on one of these books, and so that's the type of thing. Like I'm pretty confident in my ability to catch most restoration, but I don't know how to catch everything. And there's things that you can still miss. Like you might think you're real good at catching color touch, but it's still like if there's a small dot, maybe you miss it and they catch it, and now you paid a bunch of extra money to get the book graded, and it doesn't have that value. So to me, that's why I would lean towards the lower end. Maybe this person should send it in the high value. Let CGC charge you more. That's how I would approach it. And if they don't charge you more, fine. You got it graded for a little bit less money. If they do charge you more, then it just means your book has more value, and then you pay more. You would have maybe expected to pay that anyway, so no big loss. Now, the other thing I just would want to comment on is that if this person is new back into collecting, for any book, let alone like an expensive book like this, you want to get that book pressed and cleaned before you get it graded. Now, me personally, I would not use CGC. I like using a third-party presser. There's multiple benefits to using a third-party presser. One, at least from my understanding, and CGC can correct me if I'm wrong, but I've generally heard that CGC typically does not do things like multiple pressing. They generally, I don't believe they do things like humidifying the book and this kind of stuff. Maybe they do, but I've never heard that. And so, whereas like third-party pressers, especially, the good ones, they will do a lot of those types of things, like as many presses as it takes to get it to where it needs to be, or, potential humidifying, doing more dry cleaning. Like I've seen a lot of people post books that they had sent to CGC and they were very disappointed with the results, like that still had all kinds of rippling and denting to the covers and no cleaning done and stuff. So, yeah, it's the simplest thing to do. Like you can just check that box and send it into them, and, it'll take a bunch of extra time and they'll do something. But I would recommend, if you're doing this, go to a third-party presser. I use the comic book presser. That's who I've been sending all my books into. But that's what I, like with this person, that's the type of recommendation I would give. I would say use a third-party presser for this type of stuff. Now, then the last thing they're talking about is shipping it. So for mailing it, you can, as long as I've never had an issue with any of my packaging. And so as long as you use some cardboard and some bubble wrap, especially if you're just sending one book, just put it between a couple pieces of cardboard in a box and you're going to be fine. Maybe fill in that space around it in the box with some newspaper or bubble wrap or whatever, and you're going to be fine. Now, for me, I have comic insurance. Mine is dealer insurance now, but you can get private collector insurance, that kind of thing. And that covers the books that I ship. Now, it covered it when I used to just have the collector insurance. That covered it as well. The dealer insurance, the one benefit there is it covers when I ship to someone that I've sold a book to. But generally, those types of coverage, those insurance coverages will take care of you when you are still maintaining ownership of the book. So you're sending the book to a presser, or you're sending the book to CGC, you are going to get the book back. You're maintaining ownership. So it's covering you on that shipment. And so that can save you a little bit of money. If you're shipping a lot of stuff, it's very worthwhile to have that type of insurance. I generally recommend to get the insurance anyway, just to protect, your investment and that kind of stuff. But if you don't have that, pay for the insurance when you ship the book. Like if you're shipping it by USPS, pay for the insurance that you get, or with priority. The $100 isn't enough. Pay the extra just to give yourself some peace of mind when you ship it. But if you have insurance, generally that will cover you in the first place. But let's see. I don't know if there was anything else he had in there. Because like he was asking about how it's paying off percentage of market value. So the other thing I look at is you want to look at it as the raw book, not the graded book. Because you don't know what the grade is going to be for sure. Like that's why you're sending it in to get graded, right? Like, so don't try and a lot of people might overestimate the grade of their own book. And so then you may be putting down a value that isn't anywhere near what the book is actually worth. And you're paying a lot more than you need to get the book graded. So just my general take on this one.